right, Nepal. I know you're heading there soon, so let's get you prepped.
I think we've got the perfect guide for this, actually.
Oh, yeah. Who that?
David Ways, from the Longest Way Home website.
Yeah, yeah. I've seen his stuff. He knows Nepal like the back of his hand, right?
He does. He's written a bunch of guidebooks, actually. Really great resource for first-timers, especially.
Okay, so what does he say about packing? I'm always curious about that. What do you need for Nepal?
Well, one thing that surprised me was that he says you got to be ready for 5 seasons. 5.
5 seasons.
Yeah, 5. And it's not just like, oh, bring a swimsuit and a parka. He gets into like each one is a real thing you got to be ready for. Like monsoon season, for instance. He talks about how landslides can really mess up travel plans and you basically need to waterproof everything you own.
Wow. Okay, 5 seasons? That's wild. But I guess it makes sense with all the different elevations, right? You're going from like the Himalayas down to like jungle areas.
Totally. So yeah, packing can be a challenge, but he does have some good advice, like layers, definitely layers. Sturdy shoes, of course, good raincoat, that goes without saying. But he also suggests a headlamp.
Oh, really? Why a headlamp?
Power cuts, apparently they're pretty common in Nepal.
All right. I did read somewhere that you should bring your own medications too, because of counterfeits.
Oh, he mentions that for sure.
Yeah, scary stuff.
Yeah, he says it's not so much about like lax regulations, but more the logistics, like getting genuine meds to remote areas with the mountains and all that. It's just tough. So that creates an opening for counterfeiters.
So it's like a supply chain issue almost.
Kinda, yeah. And he stresses that it's not just over-the-counter stuff either. Even prescription meds can be fake.
Wow. Definitely bring in my own meds then.
That's a good call. Oh, and if you're planning to trek, don't overpack.
Oh, good advice.
Yeah.
I'm a chronic overpacker.
He says porters are easy to find and not that expensive. And most hotels will store your extra luggage while you're out on the trail.
Okay, good to know. Traveling light is always the goal, especially if you're trekking. So we've covered packing, which is super practical. But what about just like the overall vibe of Nepal?
Well, he spends a good amount of time talking about what to expect from the country as a whole.
I bet. I've heard it can be quite a culture shock.
It can be intense. He uses the phrase sensory overload.
Okay, I can imagine.
Think like chaotic traffic, horns honking constantly, wires hanging everywhere.
Oh yeah, that visual's definitely coming through.
But then in the middle of all that, you've got these breathtaking temples, stupas.
Yeah.
And the people, he says, are just incredibly warm and welcoming.
It's like organized chaos, but with a side of like deep spirituality and beauty.
Exactly. He really emphasizes that you have to embrace the go-with-the-flow attitude in Nepal.
Yeah, I could see that.
Things might not always run on schedule, plans will probably change, expect the unexpected, but if you let go of those rigid expectations, he says that's when you'll really start to enjoy the experience.
That's good advice for life in general, honestly. Okay, so go with the flow. What else? Any other cultural tips from Ways?
He talks about bargaining. Apparently fixed price doesn't always mean fixed price.
Oh, I love a good haggle.
Yeah.
But I'm always worried about like doing it wrong and offending someone.
He says the key is to keep it lighthearted. Start with a smile, be friendly. It's a back and forth thing. But whatever you do, don't lose your temper.
Oh, got it. No angry bargaining.
Yeah, that's a big no-no in Nepali culture. It's seen as disrespectful and honestly kind of foolish.
Good to know. Okay, so bargaining etiquette check. Anything else?
This one surprised me. He says Nepal is actually very respectful of personal space, especially for women traveling alone.
Oh, interesting.
He says it's a welcome contrast to some other parts of Asia where solo female travelers often feel like they're constantly being watched or approached.
That's really good to know. It's always reassuring to know that you can feel safe and comfortable in a new place.
Speaking of comfort, let's talk food.
Ah, yes. Food. Waze is pretty clear on this one stick to restaurants that have generators.
Generators. Okay, why is that? Refrigeration? Apparently, food safety is a major concern, especially when it comes to meat and dairy. Generators ensure things are properly stored.
Right. That makes sense. So street food is probably a no-go.
He strongly advises against it. High risk of food poisoning, he says. But he also reassures us that the local cuisine is delicious.
Okay, good. So I won't be missing out on anything by playing it safe.
Nope. Freshly cooked veggies, chicken, fish, pork, he says those are all good bets.
Perfect. And what about water? Can you drink the tap water?
Nope. Bottled water for everything, even brushing your teeth.
Wow. Okay. Noted. Bottled water it is.
And on a related note, sanitation. Waze doesn't sugarcoat it.
Oh boy, here we go.
Be prepared for squat toilets, potentially limited toilet paper, and maybe even a lack of running water sometimes. He recommends packing antibacterial wipes and hand sanitizer, like treat them like gold.
Okay, I'm getting the picture. Good hygiene is key.
Definitely. And speaking of being prepared, let's talk travel insurance.
Oh.
Waze is very adamant about this one.
Right, it's one of those things you don't want to think about but really should.
Exactly. And Waze actually goes a bit deeper into what to look for. Like, for instance, did you know that altitude sickness coverage is often separate?
Wait, really?
Yeah. It's not always automatically included in a standard travel insurance plan.
I had no idea. Well, that's definitely something to consider if you're planning on any high-altitude trekking.
Absolutely. He makes a good point about the cost of medical evacuations. Like, if you need to be airlifted off a mountain, that's going to add up fast.
Yeah, no kidding. Okay, altitude sickness coverage, check. What about just general safety, like crime and stuff? What does Waze say about that?
Well, he actually points out that petty crime against tourists is relatively low in Nepal.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, he even says that solo female travelers often remark on how safe they feel there.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah.
But I know we mentioned those scams targeting volunteers earlier. What are some red flags to watch out for?
He gives a really practical tip. He says, whenever you're considering donating to an organization or volunteering, always ask to see their financial records.
Oh, that's smart.
He says that simple request is usually enough to scare away any shady operators.
Good to know. Transparency is key. It's a shame that people would exploit that kind of generosity, but it's good to be prepared. So let's say we're on the ground in Nepal, we've got our bearings. How do we go about planning our adventures, like tours, treks, all that stuff?
Well, this is where Waze a Device kind of goes against the grain. He actually recommends booking things locally upon arrival.
Really? Huh.
Yeah.
I'm so used to booking everything in advance.
He lays out some pretty good arguments for why it's a better approach in Nepal.
Okay, I'm listening. Convince me.
For one, he says you'll often get better prices that way.
Makes sense. Cut out the middleman, so to speak.
Right. Local operators don't have to pay those big online commissions, so they can offer more competitive rates.
Okay, I like that. And it probably benefits the local economy more directly, too, right?
Exactly. You're putting your money right into the hands of Nepali families and businesses.
I'm all about that. Responsible travel all the way.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, isn't it kind of risky waiting till you get there? What if everything's baked up, especially during peak season?
That's a valid concern. But Waze says that, in his experience, Nepal is a place where spontaneity is often rewarded.
Interesting.
He says there are almost always options available, even if you don't book months in advance. And he even makes the case that there's a certain magic in embracing the unexpected, letting your adventure unfold organically.
Okay, I can see that. Sometimes the best travel memories come from those unplanned moments. But how do you even go about finding reputable local operators once you're there?
That's where Waze guidebooks come in really handy.
Oh, right.
He actually includes recommendations for trusted guides, trekking agencies, tour operators. He even lists contact information and reviews from other travelers.
So it's like having a personal network of contacts, basically.
Exactly. Okay, so imagine this. You've booked your treks and tours. You're ready to explore. How are you going to get around? What does Waze say about transportation?
Nepal. I'm picturing like winding mountain roads, colorful little taxis.
You got it. It's a pretty diverse transportation landscape, actually.
What are some of the common ways to get around?
Well, those little taxis you mentioned are everywhere, especially in the cities. But he does warn, be prepared to haggle. Meters aren't always used.
Got it. No meter, no ride.
Exactly. Now, if you're going longer distances, buses are the way to go.
Okay, buses. I can see that.
Yeah, they're the main form of public transportation for longer trips. And they're super affordable.
And I bet they're an experience in themselves.
Oh, totally. Waze describes them as a microcosm of Nepali society. Like you might find yourself sitting next to a monk or a farmer bringing produce to market. It's a real slice of local life.
Love that. But I have to ask, what about safety? I've heard stories about those mountain roads being a bit, well, treacherous.
He does address that. He says to stick to reputable bus companies that prioritize safety.
Okay, good advice.
And if you're traveling during peak season, he suggests booking tickets in advance. Avoids those long waits and the whole overcrowding situation.
Makes sense. What about if you're prone to motion sickness? Any tips there?
Bring medication, for sure. And try to snag a seat near the front of the bus.
Okay, good to know. So we've got taxis, we've got buses. What about domestic flights? Are those an option too?
They are, yeah. And they're surprisingly affordable.
Oh, that's good to know.
If you're short on time or want to avoid those long bus rides, domestic flights are a great option.
I bet. But aren't flights in Nepal known for being a bit, well, unpredictable?
That's true. Weather can be a factor, so delays and cancellations do happen. Way's advice, be flexible.
Always good advice when you're traveling.
He also recommends booking directly with the airlines. They tend to have the most up-to-date information on flight schedules.
Okay, makes sense. So we've talked transportation, but let's get back to the bigger picture for a minute. Why Nepal? What is it about this place that captures people's imaginations?
Well, I think what comes through in Waze's writing is that Nepal offers this incredible range of experiences.
Right, it's not just one thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've got the Himalayas, of course, those iconic mountains, the trekking. That's a huge draw for a lot of people.
Yeah, I have to admit, I'm already picturing myself standing at the foot of Mount Everest, just taking it all in.
It's a powerful experience.
Yeah.
But even if you're not a hardcore mountaineer, there are so many trekking options. You can find something that suits your level and still get those breathtaking views.
Are there any specific treks that Waze recommends for, well, beginners like me?
He's a big fan of the Poon Hill Trek. It's in
Right.
the Annapurna region, and it's known for being relatively short and easy, but you still get those incredible panoramic views of the Himalayas.
Okay, Poon Hill noted.
And then, of course, there's the cultural side of Nepal.
Right, it's not just about the mountains.
Nope. It's this fascinating mix of ancient traditions, religions, art forms. You can explore centuries-old temples and stupas, experience colorful festivals.
It sounds so vibrant.
It is. And Wazer really emphasizes that spiritual energy that permeates the country.
And let's not forget about the wildlife.
Oh, right. Nepal is home to some incredible animals.
Tigers, rhinos.
Exactly. He highly recommends Chitwan National Park for wildlife viewing.
I've always wanted to see a rhino in the wild.
Well, Chitwan's your spot. You can do jeep safaris, canoe rides down the river, even trek through the jungle with a guide.
Okay, my list of things to do is getting longer by the minute.
I know, right? And we haven't even touched on the cities, the food. There's so much to experience.
This is going to be an amazing trip, I can already tell. But before we get too carried away, I think we need a quick break.
Yeah, good idea. Let's give everyone a chance to process all this Nepal inspiration.
We'll be back in a flash to wrap things up. Okay, we're back and ready for more Nepal. You know, through all this talk about trekking and wildlife and all the amazing things to see, I keep thinking back to something Waze talks about a lot.
What's that?
The Nepali people. Like, he really emphasizes that human connection. It's not just about the scenery, it's about the people.
Yeah, he really captures that, doesn't he? He talks about them being resilient, welcoming, and so connected to their traditions and their land.
Exactly. It's like you're not just visiting a place, you're experiencing a culture through its people.
And he gives those great examples of being invited into homes for tea, learning about local customs,
Yeah.
even participating in festivals.
Yeah, it's those kinds of experiences that really make travel meaningful, you know?
Totally. It's not just about checking sites off a list.
So for someone listening to this, totally hooked on Nepal and ready to book a trip, what's the one piece of advice that stands out from Waze? Like, what's the key to really getting the most out of that experience?
Good question. I think it goes back to something we talked about earlier, that whole go with the flow attitude.
Right. Because things don't always go as planned in Nepal, do they?
Nope. Flights
Yeah.
get delayed, weather changes. You got to be ready for anything. And Waze actually points out that often those unexpected detours lead to the best memories.
It's like surrendering to the journey, right?
Exactly. Be open to new experiences, be flexible. That's how you find the magic in Nepal.
I love that. Okay, so Nepal, here we come. Any last words of wisdom from you or from David Waze before we send everyone off on their adventures?
Pack your bags, get your visa, double check that altitude coverage, and grab a copy of one of Waze's guidebooks. They're packed with info and tips, really helpful for planning.
Yes. Head over to The Longest Way Home. Check out his Nepal guides. You won't regret it.
All right, I think that's it. Have an amazing time in Nepal, everyone. Embrace the unexpected, soak it all in.
Until next time, happy exploring.